You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 goth talk podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Cemetery Confessions. This month we are chatting about the philosophy of goth. We are reviewing the newest album from 6th June. And for the philosophy segment, we are sitting down for a discussion with William, Faith, and Scary Lady Sarah about the state of the goth scene and a whole bunch of other stuff like the history of goth and a bunch of fun things. So, as always, I am the Count, and I'm here with my co-host Mark.
Hello
Mark.
there.
And our guest this month is the lovely Dani from all the way across the country. Hey, Dani.
Hi.
If you could tell us first a little bit about what your first introduction to the goth scene was, what kind of pulled you into it, and then tell us a little bit about your local scene, what kind of stuff is going on there, and all that good stuff.
Totally. Well, I got into goth because of like punk and stuff. My sister was really into punk, but like more like bands like Rancid and like Anti-Flag and NoFX. So like that's what I used to listen to, and that wasn't like dark enough for me, and it didn't have enough like keyboards for me because I've always been a piano and keyboard player. And so I remember like one day looking up like girl punk bands, and I stumbled upon Susie. And of course, from then on, it was just like a rabbit hole. Yeah. I mean, I have her eyes tattooed on my back now.
Yes,
so,
I love it.
Yeah. So basically from there, I just started getting more and more into stuff. I mean, I was really into the Smiths and like Susie and The Cure from the beginning. But of course, because I was really into punk before that is when I started getting into like death rock and everything. And that was sort of like my preferred choice. I'm still into it.
Cool. So what about your scene? Like what kind of are there a lot of shows? Are there any like dedicated venues? Do they move around? Like how many people are in the scene? That kind of stuff.
There's always shows every weekend. I mean, the majority of them are a lot of like, I'd say like dark wave and post punk, which is cool. Like Terminal A, Egrets on Ergot, they play a lot, and they're really, really good for like LA bands that sort of have like a death rock, sort of like cyberpunk, synth punk influence, and they're really cool. There's clubs that happen monthly too. My favorite's War Dance. That's the death rock club in Chinatown. And other than that, there's like the LA Dead crowd, although I don't really go to most of those. And then Release the Bats, of course, which is a great club.
Is that a monthly event, or is that?
It's monthly.
Because I think it changed, right? Okay.
Or it might be bi-monthly now, actually. I don't get down there much because it's all the way in Long Beach, but yeah.
Okay. So, all right. So let me ask you this then. I don't know how long you've been in the scene, but this came up when I was talking with William and Sarah, and we were kind of arguing about death rock today and like death rock revivals and stuff like that. So before I like give any kind of opinion here, what do you think about? Do you think death rock as it stands today is still pretty innovative and exciting, or do you feel like it's just kind of a retread of everything that already happened in the 80s?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's a little, like, I guess in the terms that I would use, it's like maybe like a little flat, because there's nothing really like new for me. I feel like a lot of the new death rock bands, they sort of all sound the same. I mean, I just played a show with The Wraith and Shrouds here in LA with my band, and they are really good. I really like what Shrouds is doing. Steven, he uses a lot of synths, and that's my thing, and he has a really good voice too. So there's some good bands and everything. And the style itself, I mean, it's pretty good too. But music-wise, I don't really hear a lot. that's like new,
innovative. Yeah, it's kind of rigid in what the sound is, right? What band are you in? I didn't even realize you were in a band.
Oh, I'm in a band. We're called Chasing Alice. We're dream pop, shoegazy.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Oh,
I play the guitar.
Oh my God, there's not enough guitar in goth music. That's
awesome. Yes, there must be more.
I have a super white guitar, and like my band says it's a little like lame, but I love it.
No, that sounds fucking awesome.
People are always like, the 80s called and they want your guitar back, and I'm like, hell no, this is mine, and I'm always gonna use it.
All right, you'll have to send me a link to whatever stuff they have then, because I'm going to put that in the show notes.
Definitely.
Sorry, I obviously I didn't do my research, but that's fucking cool. Awesome. So, all right, well, let's I had this idea for I don't know if you saw this the 40 Years of Goth, those 2 videos. But she just put out a new video today kind of explaining why she did that video.
Oh no.
And it got me thinking, because she wrote a book a long time ago called Encyclopedia Gothica, and we really kind of shit on her 2 videos extensively on this podcast before, but I thought wouldn't it be fun for a really dumb segment to have a goth word of the month? So that's what I'm gonna do, because we'll see if this fails or not.
So this is gonna be like Pee-wee.
Basically, I'm gonna open this book, and the first thing that I see is gonna be the goth word of the month.
Oh joy.
So
oh my God.
All right, here we go. Hopefully this doesn't fail too miserably. All right, so here it is. Hand staple forehead. Phrase used online expressing sarcastically drama or tragedy is afoot, and someone somewhere has his or her hand raised up to the brow as in a grand, silent film star-like gesture, planted so firmly to the head it's as if it's stapled there, abbreviated as HSF. So there you go. There's your.
I've never heard of that before.
Yeah,
but
that's a new one for me.
You guys, neither of you have heard that before?
No.
Not hand, staple, forehead.
Yeah, I have, actually.
See, I would think it would stand for holy shit fuck.
Yeah, me too, honestly.
JFC, HSF, yeah. No, I heard it. Actually, no. Actually, the first time I saw it was in that documentary called about the Goth cruise. And they had a photo of everyone that went on the Goth cruise, and they all put their hand on their forehead. I was like, oh, that's funny. And then I looked it up, and it was like in a couple forums or something. But
they didn't make me do that, thank God.
Before we jump into the rest of this show, I wanted to give a quick shout out to a couple new podcasts that were just added to the Belfry. The first of which is the Morbid Curiosity podcast. This is a podcast about serial killers, ghosts, ancient remains, obscure medical conditions, archaic mysteries, mythical creatures, and more, told in a story format. This is really a great podcast if you're into kind of spooky historical artifacts and ephemera. I highly suggest this podcast. Of course, it's on the Belfry Network. The second show we've added this month is The Midnight Lounge. The Midnight Lounge features Robin Graves and Marlena Midnight, who are the horror hosts of the television show Midnight Mausoleum. It's a weekly show where they hang out and talk about horror movies and film, TV shows, books, and other spooky, fun stuff. It's pretty relaxing to listen to. Get that on the Belfry Network as well. And finally, of course, I would like to thank our Patreon members. This show would not continue without the support of all of you on Patreon. If you haven't checked out our Patreon page, you can sign up for as little as $1 a month, and you will get some special videos. You could get early access to the podcast episodes before they're published. All kinds of exclusive content. If you sign up at a certain level, you can get a shirt. There's a lot of great stuff. So I would first like to thank our founder level Patreon members. That continues to be Esmeralda and Abigail, two very lovely people I am happy to know. At the Nocturnal Council level, we have Ariel, Trey, Samantha, Devin, and Anthony. And joining us this month, back from the grave, Nephilim Incorruptus and Necromancy of Necromancy Radio, a fantastic podcast, also on the Belfry Network, if you haven't checked it out yet. And then finally, at the Crow's Call level, we have Robin, Willow, Dom, Elizabeth, Marco, David, Shelley, Rick, Elizabeth, Jen, and Lyrillith. All beautiful, wonderful people who keep me going, keep the show going, and give me something to aspire to try and continually improve the show. So thank you all for your support. If you would like to check out what kind of rewards you can get, head over to patreon.com/cemetery confessions.
If this boy did this and the Gothic, stuff that went around it and the motive and everything, don't we all sort of want to know, that could be our teenager, that could be our kid doing that? How could that possibly happen?
Being described as being involved with the Goth movement, but what exactly is that? We kind of know it when we see it, but some aspects of a Goth lifestyle could they provoke such a murder?
HSF.
Yeah.
All right, so the article we're talking about this month is titled The Dark Side. Emerald City Gothic Weekend shines light on the subculture. How many fucking puns can you put in one title? All right, so it begins in the dim reddish light of Old Nick's pub. Small groups talk over beers at a smattering of wooden tables. At my table are 6 self-described Goths, and yes, they are all wearing black. But that's about where the obvious... But that's about where the obvious stereotypes of the oft maligned and even persecuted subculture seem to end. The group isn't brooding or melodramatic or prone to violence. Quite the opposite. In fact, they are friendly, eager to chat, and all have horrendously responsible day jobs. Do you guys have horrendously responsible day jobs?
Yeah.
Yes.
Mine is actually not, but I work in IT, so I think I basically wear whatever the fuck I want to work, and it's fine. So I'm pretty lucky. But the Goths themselves are extremely tolerant, Ariana says. Goths are often misunderstood and vilified, but there's really no reason at all. Actually, let me ask you real quick about this. I hear people go back and forth on this about Goths being intrinsically non-violent, like not necessarily pacifists, but like super opposed to violence. Do you think that's actually the case? Like, especially now with everybody protesting Trump?
Depends on the individual, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. That's why some people argue that you can apply that just across the board to Goth itself, like the whole culture, but I don't really go that route.
Well, most people are non-violent unless you provoke them. But...
Yeah,
right.
That's true.
Right. All right. So anyway, White and Company are a handful of the core of the community that make up Eugene's small but devoted goth scene, a scene that stretches across the globe. The group is planting its black flag proudly, and I love when normal people write about goths. They always have these dumbass plays on words in these articles. So in 2017, Kevin, who is husband of Ariana, and together they founded Ghost House DJ Nights, say online battles still rage about how to define goth, a subculture that grew out of and in reaction to the punk scene in late 70s Britain. All right, so before we get to what they say goth is, I want to do this briefly, talk about how we define goth, because we actually did a whole show on this like 3 years ago, I think, at this point. And but like I know my views have changed on how I kind of define it since then. So I know we could do an entire show on that, but if you guys kind of have just a general how you define what goth is, I'd be interested in hearing it. Otherwise, I can give you what my take is, and you guys can tell me why I'm wrong.
You can go first.
Okay, all right. So on the last time we did the show, I had somebody on who he had like 5 points of what goth was, and I've modified that myself to view, because so first of all, for me, goth isn't the way I view goth is not just one thing. So here's the 4 points, and then you guys tell me what you think. So the first one is an appreciation of or affinity for goth music. And that's specific, like appreciation or affinity, because I don't think you have to be obsessed with goth music, but you have to at least like and listen to some of it. The second is a social or philosophical departure from media culture. And you could debate sociologically which term you want to use for like mainstream culture or whatever, but that's how I put it. The third one is embracing darkness, which can be manifest as the color black. It can be a philosophical aesthetic. It can be an appreciation for the macabre or other kind of creative avenues. And then the fourth that ties it all together is an active pursuit of making these things part of your daily life. So what do you guys think about that?
I agree with that. I mean, for me, goth is a lot more about the music and definitely the aesthetic, which sort of ties into the lifestyle and sort of, as you say, embracing like the darkness.
Right. Yeah. So I think like the difficulty in defining goth, and some academics have said like, because it's so hard, notoriously hard to define what goth is, that's part of what has helped it to stay around for so long. But I think when you're trying to define what the culture is, it has to be both. It has to have some degree of fluidity, without being so open that it just becomes like a postmodern identity where you have like anything is goth kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But let me ask you this then, because you kind of mentioned the whole thing about music, which I agree with you. But some people argue that being a fan of goth music that's what goth is, and everything other than that, dark aesthetic, the clothing, even, that's all a separate lifestyle, and that's just kind of an extra thing, but you don't need that. Some people even say that's like Gothic, but I've heard that argued before.
I think that all of that branches out of the aesthetic that comes from the music. I'm of the persuasion that goth culture is a music-based subculture. It is based around that style of music and the aesthetics therein. And like you said, it's an active pursuit of making those aesthetics part of one's daily life.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Actually, funny, Mark, you made me think of something. I heard someone arguing, because there's this whole debate going on right now about people being angry that certain people are saying you can just dress goth and that's all you need to do and you can be goth.
That's horrible.
Somebody tried to make the argument that, and this was based on that Pitchfork video. I think it was Pitchfork that did the history of goth. There was like that animated thing that was like 5 minutes long.
Yeah.
And in it, they say that Susie was the first goth, and her appearance started to become more goth before she started making goth music. So then someone tried to make the argument that goth can just be a fashion culture because of that. And I almost died laughing, but like, that's a real thing.
There's like a whole scene in like LA. They have like a club night. It's called like Soft Leather, and like that's sort of like what they believe in too. It's really horrible.
Isn't Soft Leather a thing, like a band or something?
Oh, I have no clue.
I think that's.
It's sort of here. It's like the I don't like the health goth or whatever that is, and like pastel goth club.
Right. Oh, really? Wait, they have their own. That's a thing there.
It sort of is. I mean, I'm sure
Jesus.
that they wouldn't really
I want to
call it
go.
that, but that's the people. No, it's horrible.
I just want to go as a spectator.
No, seriously, that's the first time. Everyone I've asked on the show, that's the first time I've ever heard of people knowing of like a thing like that.
Yeah, pretty
those
much.
two.
That's like pretty much where those people, like the people that like to dress that style, go.
So what do they play there?
Like, it's a mix between like, I don't know, like EDM to some like dark like trap.
Dark techno. Oh,
yeah,
trap.
stuff.
Have you heard of trap goth?
Yeah, I heard it in the Gothquisition.
Oh, okay, awesome. Oh man, yes, God. Oh man, I never want to think about that again.
I like
no, but
Crystal Castles, like, I don't know, maybe
Yeah.
some Astra and Trust on a good night.
Oh, but secret. That's the thing, though. None of that stuff is associated with the music because, like,
Right.
Crystal Castles has been around forever. With the whole thing with Susie, that's part of my argument for why goth isn't just specifically music, because the fashion and the music all grew up together. Like the references to Gothic literature, all that stuff kind of happened at the same time. And like if you look, even in like 76, I watched an interview with Susie, and she was dressing. It was right before, I think, the Scream was released in 77. Is that right? But she was talking about how she was setting up for Susie and the Banshees, and she was kind of had her normal style. And then if you look back in 75, she was dressing much more punk when she was into the punk scene. So in general, I think that Pitchfork video is pretty awful, especially at the end, because they say Kanye is goth, everything is goth, Snapchat filters are goth, whatever. I don't know. That whole thing was bullshit.
Yeah, well, like, it's important to note that no single band created goth. Like, I don't think you can attribute it to just Susie or, just the Cure.
I don't know.
Wasn't it the Mission? Wasn't it Wayne that said that he was like the goth father and he's the one who created goth? I thought I read that in an interview he did.
Are you sure that wasn't Peter Murphy? I know Andy Sex Gang has a story about the Gothic Goblin. That's the thing about it. There's so many. There's like 5 or 6 different stories, legitimate stories about where the term even came from. For me, I always thought like my own thing was like the Bela Lugosi's Dead single was the first true goth album, and that was like what, 79, 80, something
Yeah,
like that.
I agree. That's what it was for me too.
So, but yeah, it was, I don't know, everything back there, it was an explosion. Everything was, there wasn't such a delineation like we have now. But
Well, you could argue that maybe it wasn't just the bands at that time that helped create the goth scene. It was also the concert goers and the listeners and just all the enthusiasts.
Yeah.
I think they all helped.
Okay, so, well, I guess let's move on in the article here. The group around the table quickly settles on a few parameters. Okay, so they're talking about what goth is. Portraying beauty through darkness offers Caven of metal band Feld, which performs Saturday night. The beauty of decay adds Regina, who is a dancer and choreographer for Darkwave meets world music band Black Magdalene.
Wait, why is there a metal band performing at a goth thing, though?
I know, and why is he telling me what goth is? For me, it's got a lot of ties to absurdism and surrealism. Ariana chimes in. One of the best modern descriptions I've seen of absurdism is depression is when you say everything sucks. Absurdism is when you say everything sucks, LOL. So, okay, here's I don't know. Do you guys want to say anything about that? Because I certainly have something to say about that.
You go first.
Okay, so I think we have to be careful when when we're saying a philosophy, attaching outside philosophy to goth, because I think there's a lot of different worldviews that are compatible with goth. Like even when I was so back when I was a Christian, and I was part of the Christian Goth culture, I was part of my Goth identity was trying to say these parts of Christianity are also part of Goth, like they're compatible. But the thing is, like, theology or philosophy or ideals that have existed long before Goth was around, I don't think you can tag those on, because Goth ideology, in my view, is an appropriation of different philosophies and different cultural aesthetics and ideologies, and it takes all that stuff and kind of bastardizes it and makes it its own thing. So like I hear people trying to justify Dia de los Muertos as Goth.
Oh, no.
But it's not. That's like it's its own culture. You know, to say that anything that celebrates death is Goth is ridiculous, because that's just, you know, implicit in human life. So to say, you know, and absurdism specifically, I don't see any similarities, because absurdism, I don't think should really understand. I don't think that's an accurate description of absurdism, but yeah, I don't think I hear people say stuff like that a lot. Like, for me, Goth is this other thing, but usually that's stuff that's been around since like Plato or whatever. And I think Goth is its own thing. It takes a bunch of stuff and messes with it and makes it Goth, right? I don't know.
I kind of think it's all just, I think it's really just about the music, and everything else is just theorizing, attaching all these meanings to it, but I really think it's as simple as just being a music-based subculture. Everything else is kind of subjective.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, like, one of the guests we had on before, who's working on her PhD thesis, she is using, she's trying to develop and define what so philosophical aesthetic is basically, it's not aesthetic as like something looks a specific way. A philosophical aesthetic is kind of a lens through which we view the world. So she's trying to define, or at least explain or explore, what the Goth philosophical aesthetic is. So I personally, I think the music is really important, but I think it's more to it, especially since the 90s and forward. I think there's more to it. And I don't know, some people don't even want anything to do with any of it, and they just want it to be whatever the fuck they want it to be. So, but I don't know. Anyway, so White continues, the Goths are the ones sitting there going, oh my God, civilization is going down in a handbasket, but we're still going to dance and laugh about it because that's the only rational response.
Well, I don't think that's really true, because I feel like there's a lot of like activists out there within the goth scene trying to like really change things and I don't know, inform people on like the state of society. So I don't know. I don't really hear people being like, "Oh, Obamacare is leaving. Let's go have a dance party and like try to get over it."
Yeah. No, and that's part of what makes goth great, is it's not tied to you can be a nihilist, you can be an existentialist, you can be whatever, Buddhist or whatever, and still be goth. Like, the whole making those assertions about worldview from that direction, I think, are more tied to your own philosophy on life rather than what goth kind of imposes on how you see life. I don't know.
And it's still interesting to hear people's philosophies on it.
Yeah. So, all right, for Marilyn, who is a local noise artist known as Hobby Knife, who became a goth after coming from the punk scene in Chicago in the 70s and 80s, she never understood the negative stereotypes. Quote, I think mainstream people somehow get an idea that it's depressed kids. Because I came to it older, I didn't really see it as my way out. It was more about music and fashion for me. You know, I'm so sick of talking about oh, what are the most common misrepresentations of Goths? So everybody thinks they're depressed. Everybody thinks they're Satanists, whatever. So sick of talking about that, but it still happens. Like we were just saying that one guy who wrote a fucking book about how people with tattoos or Goths are all into hallucinogenics and whatever. There was that study that came out 2 years ago that had really awful methodology that all the news outlets picked up and said Goths are more likely to self-harm and be suicidal and depressed. And
yeah, that was stupid. I remember that.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's like the bubble that I live in where that's people just don't do that, but that stigma is amazingly still exists, which is crazy. I don't know.
Well,
Do you guys
people
do you
just
run into
don't
that?
people don't like the color black. I think that's the core of it, because in our culture, black kind of symbolizes evil and darkness and depression. So I think that kind of makes it easy for people to associate goth culture with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, with
Dani,
death.
do you run into any of those? Because I think you're a Satanist, right?
I was involved with the Satanic Temple for
Okay.
a bit. I'm not anymore.
Okay. So, but that's why that was interesting to me, because I just became an atheist in the last 6 months. So whenever I would run into people, I was a Christian beforehand. People were like, "Oh, you worship Satan, right?" I could be like, "No, you dumbass, I'm a Christian. Haha, joke's on you." But as someone who is actually a Satanist, you have like to both destigmatize what Satanism is and destigmatize what it means to be goth. It seems like it's a double pain in the ass.
Yeah, it was. I remember my parents had found out by like my Facebook and stuff, and they're like, "What does this mean? You told us when you were a teenager that like goth had nothing to do with Satanism and stuff." Because like
Right.
they're Catholic. I went to Catholic high school and was for a very long time religious, and like I actually found the temple through this like humanist atheist group of people that get together monthly. They're called Sunday Assembly. They have like them all over the country and in different countries too. They're really cool, and they do a lot of activist work, and they usually have like people come and talk. And so the Satanic Temple came and did a talk there, and so like it was cool for the time being. I just didn't really have the same views as them, so
Right.
it was just sort of not my thing. But yeah, telling people that you're like a goth and a Satanist is it's like, it sucks.
Do you run into other than that, do you run into like just general hostility for how you, I mean, I don't know how often you go out dressed strangely. I know some people do, some people don't, but in your area, do you get a lot of shit for how you dress?
Not really. And even in my corporate job, like everyone knows I have the deathrock because I wear it. I don't have it like spiked up all the time, but like I'll pull it back and everything. And I'm always wearing like always black and Doc Martens and like a band shirt. So no, I really don't. Sometimes people are standoffish with me about like, wow, are you really a professional? Like looking like
Right.
that, but they get over it pretty fast. So that's good. Maybe some
do you
people
think
do.
Yeah. Do you think it's because where you live is generally more progressive or?
Yeah. I mean, LA is definitely,
Right.
super progressive, and there's
big-
weird
they're-
people everywhere on the
You're
street
just all
corners.
hedonists, like butt fucking on the street and taking drugs and stuff, right?
That's exactly what we're doing.
Okay, so Kent makes an interesting point, one backed up by Ariana. People in the goth scene tend to be older than the demographics of other subcultures, such as, say, the rave or club kid scene. Eugene's scene is no exception. Everyone at the old Nick's table that night is between the ages of 25 and 60. So I'm actually interested to hear what the kind of demographics you see there are.
It depends on like the different clubs, I'd say, because like of course there's like the whole Bar Sinister scene, and they draw a really, really young crowd. But then there's also like the older people that have been going there since the beginning 20 years ago. So at least in that, it's a wide variety. Although like the strict deathrock clubs, I'd say that everyone's a lot older. Because, I mean, they're always 21 and up anyway, so it's just the older crowd.
So do you think, well, okay, so let's go this direction then. Do you think like either, okay, so like in Chicago, we have a problem where it's a pretty good mix of demographics, but a lot of the people that are in their 40s, like late 30s and 40s, they just don't go out anymore. So they still exist, but they don't go to events or clubs. Thankfully in Chicago, I do see a lot of, there's the one main thing is 18 and up, which is Nocturna. So I do see a lot of younger people coming in. But do you feel like there's, because like I know Bar Sinister plays a lot of different stuff like Lady Gaga and whatever.
They don't play goth stuff anymore. Well, actually, they do. The first 30 minutes and the last 30 minutes of the club.
Wow.
I walked in, I went for like a friend's birthday and I hadn't been in months, and I walked in and Dead Can Dance was playing, and I was like, a slow fist up, like the Breakfast Club walking in. But then like 10 minutes later it changed and I was like, oh no, back outside.
So do you think then, like at least in your area, that there are maybe like the kind of new blood is just not there? Like maybe people are just going to age out and be over eventually? Or
I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, I'm pretty judgmental about the younger crowd, unfortunately. So I assume that like 95% of the young people that are in the scene now like aren't going to stay into it, but that's also really mean of me.
So you're one of those elitist cunts that everybody hates? Is that
I'm an elitist cunt asshole.
Welcome to Cemetery Confessions.
You are most welcome here.
So God, I know I'm gonna get hate mail for that, even though I'm being totally sarcastic. People just all right, so let's see. You don't stop being goth, Wit says with a laugh. She says that this claim is grounded in the research of Dr. Paul Hodkinson, a sociologist at the University of Surrey in England and a self-proclaimed goth. His work,
and the Count's man crush.
My boyfriend, I'm going to marry him someday, I swear. Wit explains, also has pointed to the fact that goths as a group have attained higher levels of education on average than the general population. Anne and Wit say that many goths are history or natural history buffs, stemming from goths' attachment to the Victorian fascination with curiosities and exploration. Okay, what do you guys think about that? Goths have a higher level of education, and you don't stop being goth.
Well, I would agree that you don't stop being goth. I think there's a certain aspect of, just the personality, the individual personality that just, it fits, And as far as fascination with Victorian, what was it? Architecture or something?
Yeah, history, natural history.
I was never really into it, but there are other things, in the arts and music and things that I'm always interested in and eager to learn about. So I think, maybe there's some truth to that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, naturally you have to be into history if you're a goth, because the 80s is like almost 40. Well, is it 40 years ago? Yeah, it is.
Yeah, basically.
So that is history in itself. But like the Victorian fascination, never really my thing either.
Well, even the thing with the history, like I have a couple problems with what was said there, but if you hang out in even in person with certain groups of people or online, you might actually say the opposite, that goths are not more educated than the general population or also have no interest in history. So it kind of depends who you run with, I think. Like, so first of all, just to clarify, two clarifications to what was said, actually, because if you listen to the show, you know that I've read all of Dr. Hodgkinson's papers and most of his books, except for a couple that are really expensive. First of all, he doesn't actually identify as a goth anymore, to the best of my knowledge, but he has been goth for most of his life, though. He has done a good bit of, she's right that he has done a good bit of research on aging in goth culture, which we covered a lot of actually in that episode of the same name, but he's definitely not the only person to have done so. And I would also just point out that, like, nowhere in any of his literature has he made the claim or present data to support the idea that goths as a group or as a culture have higher levels of education than the general population. So I just want to point that out because that's not true. I don't know if there's any data on that. I mean, I think it's kind of a subjective or kind of an anecdotal thing, like just who you hang out with. But so yeah, I just wanted to clear that up. All right, next quote. I don't think there is a goth that hasn't been to a that hasn't been to a museum yet just for the hell of it. We're strongly art driven. We're strongly literary driven.
We're also strongly alcohol driven.
Yeah, for me at least. Yeah. Yeah, I took Xanax and alcohol today, so I'm
good for you.
Wait, you took alcohol?
Alcohol. I took a Xanax and some alcohol today, yeah. Which you're not supposed to do. But no, I have definitely not been to a museum just for the hell of it. Personally, I think museums are kind of boring, but
I love museums. They're so great.
Okay, well,
you should get drunk and go to a museum. Then you'll enjoy it a lot more.
Fun. If there was a museum of alcohol, I'd totally go to that.
I want to get drunk and go to the Scientology here in LA has a museum on psychiatry and why it's evil, and I really want to go totally
See,
wasted.
I'd love to do the same thing, but go to the Creationist Museum where they have Noah's Ark.
Oh my god,
that would be fucking rad.
You can come visit me and we will go.
Which, by the way, there's a video. Is that by you, Mark?
It's fairly close. It's a few hours.
There's a video of Bill Nye going there and walking around with Ken Ham, and it is the cringiest, most awkward video I've ever seen.
Yeah.
So hard to watch. Anyway, yeah, strongly art-driven, though. Yeah, I would agree with that. But not like specifically art, just creative in general. I think goths mostly are pretty creative. And that's why that kind of comes across in how we dress too. So, all right. It cannot be overstated how integral music and dance and visual arts and fashion are to the culture, especially in the local scene. There is one gateway band in particular, however, that seems to be responsible for drawing many into the darkly beautiful world of goth, The Cure.
Well, that's one of them.
Yeah, that's kind of a weird. And some people even argue if The Cure is a goth band at all, but
see, I don't really classify The Cure as goth. I always classify them as dream pop, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, they can be pretty gothy in some songs, but I feel like they're just like an 80s dream pop band to me that dressed like with a goth aesthetic.
Yeah. I mean, you have like the goth trilogy. I think Pornography most obviously is the darkest, but yeah, in general, I don't really see them as a goth band. And I don't know, in my own personal experience, because I like to ask people what their first band was, and I don't think I've heard that many people actually say The Cure, like a handful of people, but I don't know. Everyone in the group has a goth origin story that is partly wrapped up in being introduced to the British goth rock new wave band's music. Quote from me, somebody gave me a cassette of The Cure, which I subsequently wore out. Oh, I remember cassettes. Those were fun. Eugene's own goth community, the group recalls, grew out of some dark wave shows in the 90s and aughts. Blah, blah, blah. The Whites began the 21 or older Ghost House Nights, Eugene, Oregon's primary goth industrial and dark 80s night in 2009, which helped solidify the community. That brings up another question, actually. Dani, for you, I know you kind of talked about Bar Sinister and the Bats, Release the Bats. Is it more, do you see more of the clubs and events? I don't know how many one-off events you have, but do you see them getting labeled more as either like dark alternative or just a whole bunch of stuff instead of just one specific thing?
A
that's
term
the trend
that's
here.
used out here now is mostly like dark 80s.
Okay.
That's
So just anything from the 80s, basically?
basically.
Okay. Yeah, here, yeah, I don't know. Actually, I don't know. I think there was a phase a few years ago where everything was alternative. And I think like dark alternative or they would just list a bunch of stuff. And I think that was a bid to kind of get more people into the scene. But I think now actually in the last couple of years, it has become more regimented in what kind of gets played. But
yeah, we're pretty much just post-punk where I am.
yeah, I'm totally jealous of that. By the
But
way.
where are you?
I go to the Nashville scene.
Oh, cool.
Which surprised me the first time I heard there was a scene in Nashville, but
Yeah, it's been around. I've been going for like, 10 years now.
so Khan says, I've always been very attracted to the darker side of art. I still consider myself an adult goth. How prevalent is the connection between the art scene and the goth scene there? Because for me, pretty much every goth I run into makes some kind of art, and that's something I really love to learn about because it gives me it creates something to talk about. It lets me kind of get a view into who that person is as an individual, and I can kind of like learn some of their methods and stuff. But it seems like everyone I run into out here does something, paints, tattoos, like sells stuff on Etsy, whatever.
Yeah, here there's a lot of that too. There's a lot of like people who vend and stuff. Art in itself can be a really big subject because even like the makeup that they put on their face, is art. Like one of my friends like always has like a new design, like full face of like different colors and everything. And even like Zachary, she has great makeup. Yeah. Every time I see her, she has the best.
I forgot that you guys hang out, or you just see her sometimes, or
yeah, we see each other.
Yeah.
At clubs and stuff. We actually should hang out. She invited me to Cloak and Dagger a couple months ago. I want to go one day, but yeah.
Well, she's my goth sister, so tell her I said hi next time you see her. Buy her a glass of wine; she'll love that. Yeah, that's one of the. There's always almost every event. Well, let me take that back. Most of the events here have vendors of some kind, or somebody handing out like some kind of promo code attached to the night where you can go to some online store and buy stuff for cheaper. But I know specifically the event that's closest to me, they always have some kind of burlesque show during the night, and then they always have some kind of featured artist, whether sometimes it's like someone who does body painting or like some kind of performance art, or just like somebody like a local artist selling stuff. But it's really connected, I think, and that's something I really love about goth in general. So
yeah, it's the same where I go. You'll always get vendors just selling their stuff, usually in the front where you come into the club. A lot of vendors.
Yeah. All right, so Khan said that goth culture and dark arts helped her process a challenging traumatic childhood as well as a slew of health issues. I think that I got attracted to it because everything was scary, and if I could control the scary, if I could be a part of the scary, if I could find joy in it, it wasn't scary. When you embrace those kinds of things and appreciate them, then the beauty of the world becomes even better, because if you can embrace the night, how beautiful is the sunshine? Yeah,
it's
and
interesting.
I think there's something to be said there. I've always kind of said that having an appreciation, having an understanding or acknowledgement of death and mortality allows you to live a fuller life.
Yeah.
As opposed to the evangelical culture I came out of, where all they wanted was for everyone to fucking die so we could all go to heaven. Yeah, I do think there can be a problem there though with kind of a coping mechanism, because I was talking to somebody about this. She wanted to make a YouTube video about death. One of her friends died, and I think that in a lot of cases, people always say, "Oh, Goths are obsessed with death, or they have an appreciation for death." But I think a lot of times it's this kind of romanticized view of death that's not really a real view on what it means to mourn or what it means to have someone die. It's kind of like, like a vampire thing or some kind of romanticized version. And I think that can actually be unhealthy in itself.
Yeah, I think there's a definite like difference between like the romanticization of death and then death acceptance. Because like I accept death. I know that like that's going to happen to me one day. It's going to happen to my parents and like everyone that I know. But I don't romanticize and fantasize about how some people do. Like that's just weird.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm still holding out for meeting my Louis and making me an immortal vampire and then never dying, but we'll see.
One time I got really drunk while watching that movie, and like one of my psychic friends was over, and I just kept asking him like, how do I become a psychic vampire? Will I not age? Will I look like that? And he was like, what the hell's wrong with you?
All right, so to close this out, one thing is for certain: for many, their goth communities are where they feel most at ease. Quote, I go into a goth club and I'm home. We're all friendly people. I don't know about that. Kevin agrees. I kind of felt like an alien in other places. He says goth culture felt like home. And the group at Old Nicky's say the space has made them feel especially welcome. This place is a gift, she says. So don't be afraid. The Goths will welcome you home even if you've never been.
That's not really
depends
true.
on the the specific scene, but okay.
Yeah, I don't know. So that's part of the tension, I think, is because like a goth club is supposed to be a safe haven. It's supposed to be where you can feel at home, where you can be around a family of like-minded people to kind of get away from everything else in life, and feel loved, right? Like for a lot of us, or for me at least, I don't have the familial bond like that some people do. So, and that's an evolutionary need, is for us to be part of a tribe, to have a family. So for me, it's my goth friends, it's the goth club, right? But the tension can be, because like sometimes even it's kind of almost like a sacred ritual to go and to do the dressing up and to go and dance and all that stuff. But then, some people will complain that because of that, it leads to people like Dani who are condescending towards younger goths who show up and maybe don't look like they belong. So it's hard to balance that, because I don't know.
I think like the people that we all know, like online, like, okay, for example, the people in California, we all like pretty much know each other, the Bay Area people and then the LA scene. And we like all take care of each other. Like when I go up to like Sacramento, we'll all get together and like have a huge sleepover, like the Bay Area and Northern California crowd. And then when they come down here, it's like the same thing. But I mean, with outsiders, it's not necessarily like that.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the end of that. I wanted to mention, Mark wanted to, Mark, do you want to, I can read the quote here. I don't know if you want to just mention what happened with this band.
Okay, let me.
Well, I can read. So basically, there's this, Soviet was deported. They were flying in to play a festival, I believe, for free.
I think it was South by Southwest.
Yeah. And the Department of Homeland Security informed they were detained, and then there was an update that Homeland Security backed up Customs and Border Protection, basically saying they didn't have the proper visa because of the travel ban which I think is actually suspended. The new one's suspended again. But they basically put them in handcuffs and put them in a prison cell and just left them there. And this has actually happened, I think, with a couple other bands as well. But I don't know. I actually, to be honest, I had never heard of this band.
Really?
Until this article broke.
Oh, they're so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went on YouTube and listened to all their albums, and I fucking loved it. But yeah, and then we've got one of Trump's healthcare appointees who said in his book that kids who seek more substantial expression through body art tend to get involved in drugs. The most likely connection between body art and drug use involves rebellion or subculture within what we can generalize and call the punk or goth movements. The kids often dress in black, wear heavy white makeup, paint their hair bright colors, and use fairly intense body art and piercings. Goths usually smoke cigarettes, and many practice an odd sort of devil worship. Although kids in the punk culture may not have any interest in these non-mainstream beliefs, not all goths are drug addicts, but a high percentage experiment with all types of drugs, including hallucinogens.
I've never tried a hallucinogen before.
I've actually never had any drugs, like other than prescription medications, but
except for Xanax and alcohol.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I did say that, didn't I? I probably shouldn't have said that. I did smoke for a while too, but I don't. And actually, there's not a lot of goths that smoke anymore. I think partly just because of the ban, because you can't smoke in clubs anymore. That was a huge thing. It always used to be. Every goth club you go to was just full of smoke.
Yeah.
And now I've seen less and less groups of people actually go outside and smoke at any given event.
Weirdly, I was at Das Bunker, the huge industrial mega club, last month, and it goes till 3 a.m., but you're supposed to close at 2, and they let you smoke inside past 2 a.m., and that was so cool. I was really into that. But also in California, you have to be 21 to buy cigarettes now, so... Yeah, there's less people smoking.
Wait, you have to be 21 to buy cigarettes now?
You do.
I didn't even hear about that.
Wow.
Except if you've served in the army, then and you have a military ID, then yeah, you can buy them.
The only experience I had of that was when I DJ'd once, and the guy said I could smoke while I was DJing. But yeah, it's pretty strictly no smoking anywhere inside.
Dude, in Kentucky, like, I remember being at a V&B Nation show in Kentucky, and the singer was like, holy shit, you guys can smoke in here? Everybody's like, yeah. So he pulls out a cigarette and just starts smoking while he's singing. It was amazing.
I remember for like the year after... Obama did that ban for flavored cigarettes, which included Dejarum Blacks. Like, I was ordering mine from India to get the real ones, and every time I would go outside and smoke, as soon as I started smoking, I'd have every fucking person out there would be like, "Oh, can I buy one? And so I'd run out of a whole pack of cigarettes in one night because everybody was taking my fucking cigarettes. But you could like trade. I started trading people for like pins or like whatever random things because everybody was so obsessed with wanting to have a Dejarum Black. But yeah, I don't smoke.
I can get them where I live. I have to go to this specialty cigar store though.
No, yeah, that's the thing. They have them now as cigars, but they're still not the exact same thing. They're still slightly modified. So to get the like legit back in the day cloves, you still have to order them from India.
I've never even smoked one of those before.
Oh, what the fuck? That was like my first experience walking into a goth thing was at a festival, and everybody was smoking these black cigarettes, and I was like, oh my god, because I was like 16 or 17. So I was obsessed with like everything has to be dark as my soul. And I was like, oh my god, they have cigarettes that are black. I have to have them, and they were fucking delicious.
Be a poser then.
They smell amazing.
I smoked those white cigarettes. God damn.
God.
Arrest me now.
It was either you or Athena, but somebody posted a bathroom selfie and you could see a white bath towel, and I was like, how dare you not use a black bath towel? You're such a fucking poser. You're not true cult goth. But yeah. All right, so that's the end of the news. We're going to go ahead and jump into the album review.
Album review.
So the album we're reviewing this month is titled Virgo Rising by 6th June. 6th June is a band from Berlin with origins in Belgrade, formed in December 2007 by Laszlo Antal, visual artist and actress Lidija Anadovin. God, I'm so bad with names. Having two people in the band who are closely connected to film, theater, and video art enables 6th June to be recognizable not only by the music, but by the visuals as well. So I'm going to go ahead and play a track from the album, and I am going to be playing Night Before. But so yeah, Mark, why don't you go ahead and tell us your thoughts on the album?
Okay, well, I don't
Did
have
you do track by track? No.
Yes, but I didn't get very thorough in my review because I was literally just listening to it at work today.
Okay.
And trying to hide my headphones from everyone at work.
Oh man,
so
that's unfortunate. This album's fucking great.
Yeah.
Well,
but,
tell me what you thought about it, and then we'll go.
Well,
around.
I did do a track by track review. It's just not extremely thorough. Okay, we'll start with track 1, Night Before, which we just listened to. I think this song definitely gives the indication that this album is going in a different direction compared to the previous 6th June albums. Definitely a stronger, like, 80s new wave vibe than the previous albums. I think previous albums kind of leaned more toward, like, dark wave, would you say? Like, synth-driven dark wave.
I haven't listened to their previous albums.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know.
Forget
I'll
everything
take your word for
I
it.
fucking said. Okay. The saxophone is a nice touch. I thought it was really sexy, and it's been a while since I've heard a saxophone in any kind of goth music. I think the last band I can think of is like Sisters of Mercy, who had a saxophone in their one song. But
well,
Sad Lovers and
Totenwald.
Giants.
Sad Lovers and Giants. Yeah, new bands like
okay.
Totenwald has just added a saxophone player. But yeah, I like guitars, Dani, but saxophones give me the hardest erections. So.
Yeah.
You know, Roland actually came out with this synthesizer that you use to you blow air through it. So it's like a synthesizer with air. I'll have to send it to you. So it's like an in-between between like my guitar and a saxophone. So you should get one. That should be your instrument.
Amazing. Endless masturbating is what that would be. Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I'm thinking of you blowing a synthesizer now. Okay, track 2, I guess Nebo is what it's called. This one kind of reminded me of like slower Depeche Mode tracks from, say, like their late 80s era. Like maybe songs like The Things You Said or Behind the Wheel. Kind of an ominous, really synthy, retro synthy sound.
Yeah.
Track 3, Call Me. I thought this was more of the familiar 6th June style. I think this was, since you haven't listened to the previous albums, the sound in this track was more similar to those albums. Track 4 was just an instrumental track. It kind of reminded me of like a soundtrack to maybe like an 80s sci-fi movie or something. Track 5, Other Side of Love. Slower paced track. The sax is back. That's what I have written down. Kind of sounds like a song from an 80s TV cop drama. And
yeah, I guess I can hear that.
And I also put that it was the sexiest song on the album, so I can definitely see myself rubbing one out to this song.
Blow that saxophone right into my butthole.
At some point in the future. Track 6, My Joy, kind of continues the vibe of the previous song, so, you know, I can do seconds to this song. Kind of a cool low guitar sound. You could really do like an ethereal dance in a goth club to this song, I think. Let's see, track 7, Knife in the Water. I had that it had more of the like the late 80s Depeche Mode sound. It also kind of reminded me of the Frozen Autumn.
I think so.
Yeah. And the last track 8, was Falling, which I put that it basically takes the sound of the previous song and just reworks it. I think that's one of the really cool things about this album. Even though there like aren't many tracks, it flows together like so well. Like this album is just so cohesive.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's easier to just listen to the whole album all the way through than just, pick and choose certain tracks from it.
Yeah.
Um,
So out of 5?
so yeah, normally I would be like really nitpicky because there's so few tracks. There are only 8 tracks. And I'm generally not a fan of instrumental tracks as much as I am tracks with lyrics in them. But I find it hard to give this anything less than 4 stars because it's just awesome. I thought it was great.
Okay, cool. Dani, do you want to go?
Okay, sure. So immediately, like the first song, the intro really pulled me in with the whole.
Yeah.
I mean, it just reminded me of like Sad Lovers and Giants, and I love them because I love saxophone and music. So that was really cool, and I liked the first 3 a lot. And then when it got to the 4th track, Tatjana, or however you say it, I really disliked it because I feel like it had a sort of house music vibe at the end, and that was really not my thing. And then the song after that sort of revived it.
Sorry, just a note on that on Tatjana. I thought it felt kind of like a world music kind of thing to me. With
definitely.
Yeah.
And sometimes that could be done really, really well in darker gothy music, but it just didn't really hit it for me in this one. For that track, although My Joy through Falling, those were really good too. So overall, I thought it was a good album.
What would you give it out of 5 if you could?
I'd probably say a 4.
Okay. Also,
because the world music thing was just sort of not my thing.
So for me, I was so fucking excited. Mark, you suggested the album, and when I heard that saxophone, I was like, "Oh Jesus, yes, please give it to me now." So I was so excited. And yeah, I think what I liked most about this album is kind of like the Rendezvous EP. There was a lot of variety to it, but it was still it had a consistency. And I really liked how well done even though the house or the world music stuff wasn't my favorite thing, I think it was still well done, and I appreciate that. See, this is why one of the reasons I love the album so much is because I've been doing a series called Post Punk Party where I'm playing music from all of the new bands that are coming out, and this album really stands out among all those other bands as being really unique, not just for the saxophone but for the dark wave elements, the dream pop elements, the kind of ethereal stuff in there, and all the it's really kind of avant-garde but still I think falls within what could be called goth music, and I really like that. It was kind of like I love listening to new death rock stuff and new kind of post-punk or dark wave or whatever, but the album as a whole, taking it as a whole thing, was really kind of a breath of fresh air. I think probably my favorite songs were the first one with the saxophone, and then I think Call Me and I think Knife in the Water. Those were the more dancey ones, or maybe it was My Joy, I don't remember. But yeah, if that's what the previous albums sound like, I'm definitely going to check that out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was just excited to hear this because I've been trying to find every single band, whether they're good or bad, that's coming out and making new kind of goth or dark wave music, and this really stood out for me among all that other stuff. So just for that alone, and for the production quality and the composition and how much I enjoyed the saxophone, I'm actually going to give it a 4.5 and definitely recommend it to anyone who wants to hear some new music.
Sweet.
All right, so that's Dani. Why don't you, before we go, tell the listener where we can check out your band again, what the name of it is, any kind of other projects or things you want people to listen to or buy or whatever.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah, you can find my music on SoundCloud under Chasing Alice, and we have our demo that we just recorded on there, and a lot of other stuff with like, we post like new ideas that we have for songs and everything. And then I'm starting to DJ stuff in LA, so hopefully getting more gigs on that and everything, because I spin vinyl.
What's your DJ name?
You know,
do you have a DJ name? You have to be cool and have a stupid DJ name.
I do. It's DJ Dani Darko, because that's I love Dani Darko.
I was gonna say I was gonna make something up and it was gonna have the word dark in it, and I'm so excited that you had.
I DJ'd like
Dani Darko,
in
that's
January with a friend, and he's like, "Your DJ name should be Double Dare Dani," and I was like, "That's really horrible."
I love that kind of stuff though. Like even with, you know, back when it was popular to have a goth name, like it's fun ironically. And I don't know. I like the stupid names. That's not a stupid name though, just to be clear. I like that. That's pretty clever. All right, cool. So I'll have links to that in the show. And Dani, don't hang up yet, but thanks for coming on. It was fun to hang out and talk with you.
Yeah, definitely.
You don't wake up one day and decide that you are goth. It's a mindset. It comes naturally. It's a lifestyle.
Just so you know, goth is about 3 things: clothing, music, and lifestyle.
I don't actually have a problem with the goth stereotype of the droopy music and the lots of eyeliner and all black.
It's not about being depressed, and it's not about being sad and locking yourself in a dark corner and just writing sad poetry until your fingers bleed. A lot of people think that goths are Satan worshippers, or, you know, they sacrifice animals or they drink blood.
The goth culture is finding beauty where other people wouldn't think to look.
What is goth? It started out as an artistic movement about 400 years ago. Gothic art, Gothic architecture, Gothic literature. Where do you think we get the term Gothic novels from?
To me, what goth is a movement where people who like a certain type of music dress in a certain way to express that taste in music, and that's all it is. It's just an aesthetic thing.
So what makes you goth is not to do with any kind of criteria. I don't know why people set out criteria.
There's a very few things that I actually call goth. You see, that is the difference between old school goths and many other people, is that we are very cautious about what we call goth, actually.
A lot of kids become goths because it just looks cool, you know, and that's fine too. But at its core, it really is this this dismissing of the mainstream belief that we're happy all of the time and no one's ever sad, you know.
We're here with William Faith and Scary Lady Sarah. William Faith is, of course, one half of the renowned band Faith and the Muse, which formed in '93. However, William began his career in the early 80s in the bustling underground scene of LA, playing for a panoply of glam and punk bands. In '89, he co-founded the Gothic punk band Wreckage. In '90, he became a member of Mephisto Waltz, and in 2011, he co-founded Bellwether Syndicate with Sarah. William has also supported both live and in the studio bands like Christian Death, Sex Gang Children, Shadow Project, The Eternal Afflict, Catastrophe Ballet, and the March Violets, just to name a very few. But William isn't just a musician and vocalist. He has worked as a producer for acts such as L'Âme Immortelle, This Ascension, Sunshine Blind, and recently Autumn, and many others, of course. He's also a DJ. He teaches permaculture classes here in Chicago. He's an activist, and he has run and worked for record labels, and of course is a massive supporter of the goth scene. Sarah runs, or has been running, Nocturna, Chicago's largest goth alternative event, for over 28 years, which is crazy. As well as many other nights and concerts around Chicago, such as Shimmer, which is a dream pop shoegaze night she started in 2004. She's also a DJ who has played events such as Convergence and Wave Gothic Treffen, just to name a few. Bellwether Syndicate is, of course, the goth rock post-punk band founded by her and William, through which they promote activism and some good old-fashioned dancey goth sounds. In addition to all that, she runs American Gothic Productions, through which she promotes and schedules shows for some of the scene's biggest acts, In fact, Sarah has been a driving force behind the Chicago goth scene since time began, it seems. She's an ardent supporter of the music, art, and culture of the underground, and for that we owe you our eternal gratitude. So hopefully that was all correct information, but thank you guys so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, I guess a good place to jump in here would to kind of go back to the beginning and talk a bit about and learn a bit about some of your experiences with goth or whatever it was, the alternative scene in those early days when you were first getting into it. I know our listeners would love to hear some stories, but also just kind of tell us about what the experience was like, what it was, what personally it was that drew you into the culture, and what that kind of scene experience was like.
Hey, William first.
Well, for me, it was definitely, I know people's experiences are different, but for me, it was an outgrowth of the punk scene. That's how I discovered it. And at that time, there was really no discernible difference between punk bands and what we would now call goth bands. We just used to differentiate ever so slightly by saying that, oh, this is a death rock band or a morbid band, as we used the term back then.
Okay.
So those hard lines weren't really there. I remember gigs where you would get Christian Death and Fear and Joanna Went on the same night, and it was really, things were a lot more blended and mixed up back then. There wasn't such a stratification, and so it was just part of the overall scene that I was into. And it was only later that it started to parse out a bit more and the style advanced and continued to evolve, and so people were naturally drawn in that direction a bit more. So it kind of the Gothic term wasn't even something that was really thrown about in LA until the later end of the 80s. So it was definitely, pre-85, it was only really a literary reference or maybe something to describe the atmosphere, but it wasn't a mantle that people were using back then. And so that definitely came along later. But in the earliest of days, it had this dark romantic thing to it, and it was just part of the punk scene overall. So that was how I was pulled into it.
So were you listening to like bands in your youth and then just wanted to like make a band and got drawn into the scene, or was it more like the darker aesthetic that drew you in that direction?
In my case, it was me and my best friend Rick when we were little. When we were kids, in 1980, we were into a lot of new wave and new romantic stuff, and then we just got pulled progressively more and more over to punk rock, and it was a natural progression for us. It just evolved in that direction, and then over time, we became just a little bit more drawn to the dark aesthetic, because it was always a balance, because we loved the energy and the intensity of hardcore, but at the same time, there was that dark romantic aspect to it that really wasn't there. It was actually a little bit more of what we perceived as sort of a dark, mysterious, almost feminine energy that we were kind of connecting with. And so that was just a bit of a poet to balance a warrior, as it were, for that era. So that was kind of how we went there. And then we were both playing music, so as time went on, we had different expressions of it, and so that was just different bands. So I started doing different projects, and eventually I think Wreckage was the first band where those two sides of my interest kind of found a bit of harmony.
Well, let me follow up real quick on that, because I've heard a lot from people older than me that there was really kind of what you were alluding to in the early days, before there was such a delineation between scenes, that there was this sort of we're all kind of outcasts. We all, we make our own hair dye. We all, get spit on by the mainstream. So you had like punks and hardcore and like spooky types and all the weird, metal, and everybody going to the same events and playing shows and sharing music and stuff like that. Is that kind of what it was like in your experience?
Yes and no, because at the same time, there was definitely, that was our approach to it, and and there were a lot of other people that felt that way. But as time went on, things became more stratified and it became more uniform. And things did become more delineated and separated by styles. But it definitely didn't start that way for us. And to that end, that was something that I was never really that keen on, because there was always people that, your friends were hiding records that they didn't want you to know they had, because they didn't want you to know they were into them. So that was kind of my experience, and I know Sarah's has some similarity.
Similar, but not quite. And we're exactly the same age, and we kind of followed that same arc from punk rock to goth. But maybe it was just a geographical difference. But in Chicago, and say like the mid '80s, when I was going to hardcore shows weekly, the alternative kids of all stripe would hang out, but outside of shows. In Chicago, if you went to a hardcore show, you'd pretty much only see punks. And in that time period, the people who were more fully into what we would call now like goth subculture, but the darker aesthetic, were generally older. I was between the ages of 13 and 17, so yeah, definitely early 80s. Didn't see many people the same age as me into that. It was punk and kind of, weirdos in general, but the Bauhaus fans of the era were in their early 20s. And a lot of that stuff was all held at venues that only allowed 21 plus. Thankfully, throughout all my teen years, there were all ages hardcore shows weekly, multiple times a week. But yeah, I found the same thing. I found punk rock when I was about 12, and that definitely changed my life for the better. I was a very angry and depressed kid, and that was a wonderful outlet. The first time I ever felt like I wasn't an outsider. All my friends were from the hardcore scene. They weren't from school classmates. And some of those friendships still endure, which is really nice. But in Chicago, I think there was possibly, and we were a much smaller scene in general for everything than LA as well. I mean, much. William talks about seeing the same bands I did at the same tour, and we would have bands that would maybe sell out Metro, which holds 1,100 people, and there they'd sell out
3,000-4,000.
Yeah, 3,000-4,000 people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine for me, but it was in a way nice because everyone got to at least recognize each other, if not truly know each other. So it very much felt familial and very comforting and tribal for the hardcore scene of the 80s here.
But I think a common mantra in us in our place is that we both say punk rock saved my life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Something actually that a little tangent here. You were mentioning about a lot of the shows being 21 and up. I was actually just reading a paper a couple weeks ago about Medusa's back when it was in Chicago.
Went there all the time.
And there was a references in there to a lot of like secret like warehouse shows or events like in other places where they, it was all ages, but it was kind of like the underground, like it was a lot of drugs and stuff. But I don't know if you were able to make it out to any of those. Or
for me here, yeah, I did. William said you threw many of them. That was a little bit later, though. That was a little later, but yeah, that was part of it. That was part of it. Yeah. Back in as far as the 80s go, the one venue that I was able to make that I was old enough to even be aware of that was not exactly licensed, but kind of. That was all ages. Was called Space Place. That moved around a few times in different warehouse locations. I saw some amazing shows and art exhibits and poetry readings and other alternative art forms of the day. But most of the shows that I went to were at licensed places that did all ages shows. And back then it was very common for bands to play 2 sets in one night, an all ages show, and then a whole nother set for 21 and over. Yeah, that
also happened in LA all the time.
Yeah, that was absolutely common. And you could tell the difference between very much when the us kids were leaving, and then the 21 and overs would kind of have a little bit of an attitude towards us, like snot-nosed kid kind of thing. But
absolutely, same in LA.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, so sticking with the music theme, I guess, I have this kind of weird question, but since you have both had a lot of obviously interactions with bands and bands in the scene that either label themselves or are labeled by their fans as a goth band, I know you two are obviously big proponents of the goth scene yourselves, and personally I think that for a band, it kind of creates a reciprocal, like mutually beneficial relationship. But of course you have a lot of artists who maybe don't see it that way, kind of resent the label, and I don't know, feeling frustrated being locked into only playing certain venues or things like that. So there's kind of this, who gets to label the band as goth? What does it mean? I'm interested to hear kind of stories from yourselves or from other bands, and like that maybe struggle between wanting to express yourself artistically and maybe not wanting to be labeled and all that?
Well, I know for speaking for myself, having only recently become a member of a band and have always been a fan and DJ first, I think it's the fans that decide if you're goth or not. And you may not, there's been, I think even since the very beginning of the term being used, bands have not wanted to be labeled that, because in general, bands don't want to be pigeonholed under any one narrow category, because then that limits their audience, potential market, etc. I have never personally shied away from being called a goth. I kind of think I'll always be. It's not all I am, of course, but that's
right.
It describes me pretty well. Bands that were calling themselves goth, like predominantly in the 90s, there was more of a very specific kind of look, sound, prescription for being a goth band and a self-described, declared goth band. That's fallen away quite a bit. Some of them still exist, and there's new ones that come up and kind of follow that. I personally think it's a little weird for bands that are new to do that, just because it's going to be diminishing returns every time for them, especially now when the goth scene is not thriving like it was. It's still great what exists, but it's never going to reach the same numbers that we had.
Right.
For myself, I would say that I know virtually no one from any of the 80s era bands that ever was comfortable with that term or ever used it. And I say virtually because the only exception that I can point to is Radio Werewolf, who wore the tag proudly. Outside of them, I literally do not know one band. Not one. I mean, if you asked Roz, he wanted nothing to do with the term. Actually, I referenced a lyric of his that I actually keyed in on at one point and said, "Is that what you meant by the lyric? A handful of understanding fills and overflows," from the song Working on Beyond. And he said, that's exactly what I meant by that. So it was a world which I created, but in which I cannot live. Same idea. And so that was the references to something that was intended, that was kind of his style and his expression, that a lot of other people took up, and he kind of ultimately felt kind of strangled by later. But that was the sort of 80s phenomenon, whereas the 90s was a different beast, and people kind of really rallied around it a bit, and I was certainly one of them, and kind of proud to carry the flag for a while. But I would definitely throw in the mention that the reason that was such an option in the 90s was because the definitions of goth for that era were so broad. The fact that you could have Dead Can Dance and Christian Death and Nick Cave and Diamanda Galas and and things that ultimately, I mean, Delirium, things that sounded like Enya, things that were really all over the map, and then harder edge stuff like The Wake and and bands that really had just this whole really broad thing, and Lycia and Love Spirals Downwards. It's just such a broad spectrum of sounds and styles that at that point, if that was what you meant by goth, then sure, I definitely feel comfortable under that umbrella. But later on, right around the end of the 90s, I'd say actually pretty much 99, there was this sort of schism that occurred where there was this massive divide, and you either went with the deathrock revival or you went with the EBM thing. But it felt like the whole middle sort of fell out. And then for bands like Faith and the Muse that prided themselves on being this sort of synthesis of those things, we were kind of left hanging and sort of, hey, where'd everybody go? Because the death rock revival I wasn't interested in, because I did that the first time. And and as Jeff McDonald of Red Cross says, there's no future in revivals. And then with respect to the EBM thing, I wasn't interested. So it was that was time to to me that was time to set it on its head and get creative again and do something different.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going too. I mean, I wasn't specifically jumping to the death rock revival just yet, but there is, you guys kind of answered this question, but more specifically, when we're looking at the 80s to 90s, actually, I think I was just the other day, I watched an interview with Susie in, I think it was 76, and she was basically saying the same thing. They were trying to label her look and her music, and she's like, basically just saying, fuck you, I'm just being creative. But the whole, from the 80s to the 90s, like in the 90s, you had some bands that were, and adherents of the music that were saying, the 80s stuff wasn't dark enough, and, we're taking it in our own direction. And so I've seen various books that give kind of an account of the history of goth. Sometimes they'll assert that either true goth died in the 80s, and sometimes they'll assert the other direction where true goth was actually born in the 90s. And I kind of take the going back to what you were saying, William, the tack that I also liked, the more ethereal stuff and all the when it was more of a broader definition of what was considered goth music. Dead Can Dance was huge for me, one of the first bands I got into, and that I really have a soft spot for that ethereal stuff. But as far as, do you guys see it as more of a continuum and just kind of an evolution over time, or has there really been like such a big stylistic split over the eras that it's there's that, you can draw that kind of line between the 80s was its own thing, post-punk was its own thing, and then we had goth evolving in the 90s?
I think so. As far as the subculture, including the music and the bands,
right.
In the 90s, I think, is where it was realized and lived, and very much so faded as well. Just recently, I think there are new bands that don't come from our scene at all, to have no knowledge of it, weren't directly influenced, definitely by our subculture, but they're making really exciting music that I would call goth. They probably wouldn't, but I would do. So it's kind of coming back around to a broader array of sounds that fall under that umbrella to me. I think William kind of feels the same way about that.
For me, I mean, yeah, definitely there was the 80s they're two different beasts, because first off, for anybody who says the stuff in the 80s wasn't dark enough, clearly never listened to Swans or Coil. But
yes, yeah, that's a good point.
Or Diamanda for that matter. But and then as far as like the 90s being the birth of true goth, well, I mean, there's two schools of thought on that. On the one hand, that's where that was the era, that was kind of where that was the height of everything. It's where everything built to. But for me, I'm one of those people that everything you ever needed to know about goth started and ended with Only Theater of Pain. It's all on that record. That's the blueprint, right there. And so that was the one that sort of set the whole wheels in motion for me. But yeah, the 90s is where everything came to a peak. It was a beautiful time and a great era, and that was where certainly Sarah and I kind of we wax poetic about it, even though things continue and there's a lot of reason to be excited currently. But that was kind of an era where we had a lot working in our favor. There was a lot of the entire subculture was really dispensed out broadly, and there were stores and websites and clubs and labels and bands. It was just really a lot of stuff was going on.
It's like when goth got its own personality, kind of came into its own as an entity.
You could put a name on it. People, your kind of average person on the street was able to put a name on it, and that's that point where things. It's a dangerous point, because once people can identify something, then they can be co-opted. And
that's what happened, definitely.
And then Marilyn Manson and Hot Topic, and
yeah. And see, for me, I want to continue on that, but for me, Ashes was my record, not OTOP, because that was like the avant-garde, the ethereal, the weird like carnivalesque stuff coming into the music. That was like, that's my jam. So I know I'm in the minority.
No, love that record.
Amazing album. Wore a needle out. We're playing that record.
It's a brilliant record, and again, the thing that I love about Christian Death was that variety. But for me, also so much of it is when you find it. And Only Theater Pain got it the day it came out, when that came out of the speakers, that was absolutely a revelation. It was just this whole new world opened up, and it was a new sound. Nobody sounded like that, at that time. And so that was 82. I was 15. And it was just absolutely life-changing stuff.
So what? Staying on the death rock thing, then I know you're not. You said you're not a fan of the revival, and that was back in like the early 2000s. But I mean, do you feel like, because some people will claim that's death rock today is really the only thing carrying on the spirit from the 80s, like. I don't know. So like Alter de Fey, Totenwald, UK Decay, that kind of stuff. what do you think about that? Is that like the true like reincarnation of goth, or is it like you were saying, too much of a retrospective, not really innovating anymore, too much, too stale, I guess?
I have a different criteria for some of the music I like than William does as a DJ foremost. But I think that there's a lot of death rock bands or self-proclaimed death rock bands now that I don't mind, but it doesn't have the spirit of the 80s because it's just copying the 80s. The 80s were the 80s because they were the innovators. They were the ones who created the style, the sound, the scene, the look, the clothes, the hair, the makeup. And copying, it's fine if that's, you feel comfortable doing that. Absolutely, I wouldn't deny anybody, but I wouldn't also say it's innovative or it's just a little bit of a pastiche.
Go ahead.
Well, the dangerous thing about revivals is that if you're not careful, for a scene to continue to thrive and prosper, it needs to be pushing the boundaries and expanding and changing. And revivals kind of by their very nature are pulling things back toward the center. It's imploding. And that's where when you get into that kind of situation, at that point you really run into the danger of it turns into like a Ren Fair event, where you're dressing up and acting like something else, and it's not yours, it's somebody else's, and you're putting it on. And
so
but to meet your other point on that, the thing that I think is less, I'm less concerned about the sort of death rock rehash stuff, and the real spirit of the 80s or 90s for that matter, I think is in current bands that are coming from outside the scene, as Sarah was mentioning, and doing things that by any other criteria we would call goth, but they're not coming from the goth scene. A friend of ours in London, Uncle Nemesis, wrote specifically, and I couldn't agree with the point more, that the most interesting goth these days is coming from bands that are not goth bands. And it's stuff clearly from outside the scene that's really catching my interest and Sarah's as well. It's just stuff that's really exciting us currently is definitely from people that they have the same references, but they don't have the same experience. They're not coming from the same era that we are. So they're doing their own unique and idiosyncratic versions of it, and that's the stuff that's really exciting for us right now.
So, okay. Oh man, there's two different directions I want to go on that. I guess with your last point, then let me ask you specifically, because I've heard this discussed before as well. When you do have those bands coming, having the darker aesthetic and playing music that could ostensibly be called goth, but being in their own scenes, does that have any impact on the culture or the individual scenes themselves when you have maybe people that are more into pop music or into like different other genres getting into those other bands and not actually having anything to do with goth, but then you have the goth scene also kind of wanting to be involved with those bands as well? Does it have any impact, or do we all just kind of hang out and enjoy the same music?
Well, I wish that we all wanted to hang out and enjoy the same music in a way. William and I have this experience very frequently where we go to see one of these bands that we're talking about live, and Empty Bottle, for example, a venue in Chicago that we frequent. It will be sold out, and we will know maybe 5 people there that are from the goth scene. And everyone else is enjoying the music very much, but it's really strange. Yeah. And we wonder why aren't more people that are into what we're into specifically by name here. And eventually they maybe the third time the band comes around, they might get used to their music, the goth scene, because they've heard it at clubs that we play at or other DJs in Chicago. But it's the goths don't seem to find these bands as easily as if they'd had the other hallmarks of goth, not just the sound.
I think people get a little lazy, actually, and they're looking for things that have that are kind of pre-made. They're looking for the goth tag on it. And actually, to be perfectly honest, a lot of the things that are being labeled goth these days, I couldn't be less interested in. But it's the bands that are coming, like I said, from outside of that that's they have a really unique spin. They're the ones carrying the flag and innovating and doing different things with it. That's what's exciting. Not the things that are trying to say, oh, we're a goth band. It's 9 times out of 10 they're doing something that's already been done.
Right. Right. Well, okay. So let me ask you this then, because so I was just reading a rough draft. Someone sent me their PhD thesis where they relayed kind of a similar story, where she had just recently gotten into goth the last few years, and she was describing her first experience at a goth club to someone who had been in the scene forever, right, since the 80s. And they both went to the same event and they had very different experiences, whereas the person who had been in the scene since the 80s said very much the same thing. It felt unimaginative, uncreative. It felt like a copy of a copy. Whereas the person who had just gotten into the scene, for her, it was maybe what that other person had experienced in the early 80s, this kind of awakening and explosion of just creativity that she had never experienced before. So how do we kind of rectify the as goth is 40 years now going on, that generational gap and that kind of tension there? Like, is that something you see? How do we deal with that?
I was at Nocturna. I've seen so many generations of patrons coming through and cycling through. It's like every 5 years there's a whole new crop of people. And since I have the privilege of allowing people that are 18 and up, not 21 and up in, I see this a lot. The younger people, 18 to 25, are so excited and happy just to be somewhere where they feel comfortable in their own skins, right, and around other people that they feel kinship with. And not a whole lot of older people go out, though. That's the thing. We get people age out. Often people will come up and say, "Oh, this is my first time. I'm having a great time here. Thank you." And I always ask, "How did you hear about us?" Because I'm curious, and it's good information to have. And more and more frequently, people have been telling me that their parents used to go to Nocturna, which is really freaky to me. So I kind of feel like I've stayed the same, and everyone else is getting younger, or older. I don't know, but I think the older people who do still come out, from my experience and what I hear, they're again. I'm talking in terms of Nocturna. It is different around different parts of the country, I'm sure. But they are pretty welcoming. And I've been doing it. I think I haven't betrayed, and again, speaking just personally, I haven't betrayed what I've always been. So, and it's not new to me. I'm not just getting into it. So I think if somebody is just continuing what they've always done, whether if they've always had a style or look or, a stereotype, that's kind of acceptable. Coming in and creating after not, I don't know, it's a little hard. I don't want to be condescending to people coming in and, dressing up in a certain way.
Right.
But it's nice to see in one way because you feel comfortable around things you recognize. But on the other hand, it's a little sad that younger people aren't coming up with something new and that still fits in, but is their own thing. I hope I made that clear.
Well,
go ahead.
But to that end, the other thing that I would add is that a lot of people's experiences are shaped to some extent by the people who are putting these events on. So when you've got people like Sarah and myself who were there originally,
right,
we're providing all that, that entire perspective and that history along with it. So that's implicit in the event. When you come Back to the Grave, or when you go to a Nocturna, you've got Sarah and or me, who have been there the whole time. So you're getting this very respectful view that has the entire history in mind. So it's coming from that perspective. Whereas somebody who may have just found out about this stuff in the early 2000s or something like that, that's trying to put on events, they might not have that same history. So when you got older folks or veterans who have been around a long time in the scene and they come out, their perspective is going to be different as well. So when I've had friends visiting from anywhere in the country who've come to a Nocturna, they're always blown away on at least two counts. First off, the size of the event, which is substantially above what most other people are doing in the country, and then also just that they're all like, wow, I didn't even know there's all this new music, and still connecting to all this great classic music. So it's kind of knitting it all together in a very unique way. And so having that perspective and that history, I think, is kind of central to to people's experience.
Sarah, going back to your last point, and actually, I don't think, for me at least, I don't see much of this happening in Chicago. But going back to talking about newer generations, we do, at least from an online community perspective, see the kind of stuff like pastel goth or stuff like new goth, or there's a bunch of other labels I can't think of off the top of my head, but that kind of stuff. And then it's usually from younger people, and their contention is that it's they're trying to be part of the goth scene and they just want to do something unique for themselves. Right. And then you have kind of another contention from the other side, talking about how really all that stuff is just a fashion thing that's in its own kind of bubble, that it doesn't actually have anything to do with goth. It's just about trying to look cool and kind of edgy like the goths do. But I don't know how much you have an opinion on that, or if you even see that kind of thing in the events that you go to.
I guess I see some of it. I'm of two minds. I have nothing at all against people wanting to look cool. I mean, that's you should look however you want.
I'll take that over the alternative any day of the week.
Right.
Yeah.
It seems to me, and I don't have a lot of firsthand experience with this, but it seems to me when the rare times I've run across that stuff, it's mostly online, and it seems mostly like a trend and a fashion trend, not something as enduring as what we would consider like goth with a capital G, that has had a pretty definitive thing to it, despite how expansive the musical side can be. And again, if kids showed up at Nocturna in the pastel goth kind of look, I'd probably think they look cute, and that's fine. But I doubt I would see them in that 2 years from now.
Right. Yeah.
In most cases, though, when people, like a lot of these things like pastel goth and Gucci goth and witch house and all these things, generally speaking, these are essentially these are T-shirts you'd be embarrassed to wear in 6 months' time.
Right. Yeah. Although I will say for the new goth stuff, I don't know how familiar you are with that specifically, but I am actually kind of looking forward to seeing that show up in the thrift stores in a couple of years, so I can kind of modify it.
Absolutely.
Right.
You guys, when you were talking about Nocturna, this is something I did want to bring up and kind of explore what you guys love about the Chicago scene, and seeing as you are, you go to VGT, Wave Gothic Treffen all the time, and you go tour and all that kind of stuff. What do you see as the differences or the similarities between all those groups of people going to their scenes in the U.S. and around the world from your experience?
I get a fairly unique perspective, having been in LA my whole life and then in Chicago for the last 6+ years. So it's fascinating to watch, and I have to really doff the cap to Sarah here on all fronts, because she has put more love and effort into nurturing and supporting her scene here in all these years than literally anywhere else I've ever seen. And I've traveled a fair bit and seen a lot of different scenes over the years, and I really haven't seen anything that is as tightly knit and well supported as the work she's done here. And it just shows in the numbers and in the scene itself. It really has put the time and love into it that is kept it going so strong all this time. And so when I made my decision to move here, it was really a no-brainer. She'd put together a really great situation here, and I've got nothing but respect for her.
That's very nice of you, honey. Well, it is definitely something I do because I love it. I'm not getting, duffel bags full of cash every time for stuff, so there's got to be some payoff, and it's just feeling it's when people say stuff like that. It's really nice.
But feel free to
I will
say
say
duffel bags full of cash.
Yeah, sure, we won't.
Yeah, unmarked bills. No, I will say, because I was just talking with Jody, because I think you guys know who she is, at the last at the Wingtip show recently, and we were talking about this very thing where there's sometimes in the Chicago scene, you'll run into people who complain about the scene, about it shrinking or about there not being enough, whatever. And we were both saying, her coming from Ohio, and me, every time I have, because I have a guest on the show for each episode, and they're all from all over the country. And every time I have them on, they're always just totally jealous of the stuff that's going on in Chicago and the kind of scene that we have here. So it always strikes me as like just kind of petty, these like nitpicky kind of complaints I run into people saying occasionally about the goth scene in Chicago, because there really is so much happening here, and people like you, Sarah, that are just so passionate about keeping the scene alive that people in other parts of the country would just kill for, and where they're from.
Yeah,
so.
Move to DeKalb. Tell me how that works out for you.
Yeah, I mean, even the big cities, I mean, all around the country, their scenes have diminished too. It's a lot of work to keep it up and keep it going, and things that were institutions in the goth scene are gone, and things you never thought would be gone are gone all over the whole country. And there's always threats of more closing. So people will always complain, though. I think sometime back when I turned 40, I probably stopped really caring if people said, grumble, whatever. They always will, and that's fine. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. I always tell everybody I'm not retiring anytime soon. So if you want to come out to a goth event, get in touch. I'll tell you when some are happening.
Yeah. And that is, before I move on to the last question here, that is something I specifically, because I've talked to people in other scenes around the country, and I've heard complaints about how the scene itself is so splintered. Like, DJs won't go to other events if they're not DJing, or people will only follow specific DJs and specifically not go where other types of music is played. Right. And that's something I really commend you on, is that you're always about not just promoting your own stuff, but just what's happening in Chicago, and like trying to get people to just go out, right? It's not a money thing for you. It's not a pride thing for you. It's just really a passion for what we have and the people that are there. And that's something I really love about Chicago. For the most part, there is kind of a support system and a camaraderie around it. And I really love that.
There was a period of time when there was a little bit of splinter, but it was around one specific thing, and people didn't really understand, and people like to take sides, but it's always been a pretty friendly scene. I'm really lucky and grateful to say good people.
So last point here, and really I could probably, if I was capable of, I'd keep you guys on for a few hours and just talk about all kinds of stuff. But last thing I wanted to talk about here, which I think is salient and important, is you guys are both activists, you're big proponents of going vegan, of creating sustainable permaculture and getting involved politically and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of have a twofold question here, which is, first of all, how do you see that interaction of activism and the local goth scene? How much of a crossover is there? But also just now that we're in Trump's America, as much as I hate to say that, how is the sense of urgency or the tactics or that kind of thing? How has that changed? How do we get involved to really push people to make a difference?
Well, I think the difference in the way it was fundamentally different. In the 80s, it was really, being part of the punk and goth scene then was a commitment. It wasn't a weekend thing. You looked different. You got in fights for it. You had to deal with a lot. And so you were there because you believed in it, and it was something that was just, it was part of you. And so as a result, there was a general understanding in that era that most of the people were, to use a very loose term, very left-leaning. That people generally believed in social justice, were against racism, were against homophobia, and so we had, we're against sexism. All these things were just implicit in the way things worked. And of course, there were exceptions. It's it's easy to whitewash history, but generally speaking, that was kind of how things work. So it was in no way uncommon that you would be at a gig or a club, and then the next morning, through one bloodshot eye, you'd be looking at your friends, at a protest or, at some sort of political event or rally. That was just, you would see the same people at these things because you all believed in largely the same things. And then over time, I mean, I suspect the 90s really were where this happened. People got sort of fat and happy, and because goth became more of a commodity, that it was dispensed into the mainstream and people could buy it. Hot Topic. That there wasn't really that commitment, that same requirement. You weren't putting yourself at any risk. It was you could buy Halloween costumes. A goth Halloween costume, which you can buy now in spirit stores with a mask, and so it became a commodity, and so it became less of a lifestyle and more of a purchase, and just something that you put on. And so with that, I think a lot of that commitment and perspective got stripped out. And so now we run into kids who are into the music, but really just have no context of what it came from and what the people that made that were like. And so it's absolutely a different era now. That said, there's still cause for hope. It's nice to see people as mobilized as they are in Trump's America. And you always run the danger, though. This is a culture of distraction, and it's a time where people are waving the right hand to draw your attention while they're doing really nasty things with the left hand. And so it requires eternal vigilance. It's tiresome. It's heavy. It takes a lot of time and effort, but it's still a fight that's worth fighting. And because the alternative is ghastly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess I pretty much agree with that. You did take it for granted at one point that if you were into the goth scene, you were also into a certain mindset about the world in general. And now there's a lot of apathy just in general, not just with the goth scene, but young people. I tried so hard to get people to vote this year, kids I know.
Yeah.
And
it's the simplest thing you can do.
Yeah. And it's... I think that there is some integrity in my mind and my idea of goth, and I think integrity covers not just your subculture, but how your life impacts the world, and that's where my strong veganism comes in, and my ideas about ecology and politics, and so to me it's part and parcel. So we do try and impart that along with the music and the parties and the fun to our patrons and our friends.
Because of the era that we came up with, those things are inextricable. They're together. They're linked. There's just no way to separate them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. I did a show on aging in youth subcultures, and I had a few guests on, and one of them, she said that she was just one day, she was in the early 80s scene, and she said just one day she was at Jewel getting some groceries, and the clerk, very nice young lady, had bright pink hair, and she just kind of thought to herself, I was the one who was beat up and spit on and threatened with knives, just so that you would have the right to wear pink hair and be a clerk at Jewel. So
there's a sticker there's a little meme that's going around currently that we both just cried tears of laughter and maybe a little bit of pain. Which is, I was into goth back when it was called "Hey Faggot."
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's another one.
It's so interesting. I just noted to my wife today as we were driving. We saw a couple people who had kind of an alternative look, and I was like, back even when I was in the early 2000s, late 90s, if you saw someone, you could tell, hey, that person's into my genre, or that person's into metal, or that whatever. And now it's just, you have no idea. Yep. Hey, you want to go to the next Lebanon Hanover show? Oh, actually, I listen to Katy Perry. Who's Lebanon Hanover?
So I mean, the old tribal markers. So Sarah and I talk about this a lot. It's back in the day, if you had blue or bright fire engine red hair and a nose ring, you were absolutely set apart. You know that those were your people. So you would give like the punk rock nod when you saw someone walking down the street that had any one of those things. Now it means absolutely nothing. There's just a recent gag. I just saw this on Facebook like 2 days ago. Someone saw some girl wearing a Ramones shirt and walked up to her and asked her to name one song, and she couldn't do it. And
But then again,
Yeah.
for me, I kind of, it's strange, and it takes some getting used to coming from, our era, I suppose. But I also don't mind so much, because I would say I look the way I look for me. If there's
Right.
not a single
Right.
person left on the planet that looks goth, I'm still going to look like this. It's just how I like to express myself. And if other people
Yeah.
want to express themselves, it means something different to them, but that's okay.
sure, for me, it was just more about being able to identify your tribe.
Yeah, oh yeah. And that was important back then when you could get the shit beat out of you just
Yeah.
because you look different.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing too. I know. I'm sorry. We'll end in a second. I keep going on tangents here, but it's kind of the thing where I've had this discussion before, where you get two different sides of the if one day you wake up and mainstream culture was all about goth fashion, would you still dress the way that you express yourself? And some people are like, no, goth has to be about being subversive and being anti-mainstream. And some people are like me personally, take the tact of, this is just who I am as a person, and it's the outward expression of that. So no, I would still be myself. My values or ideologies might still be subversive, but the adoption of the style doesn't change what it means to me individually.
No, the biggest sellout is to let something else change you.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, thank you guys so much for taking the night off and coming on for the interview. I really appreciate it. It was great to speak with you guys, and I'll see you at Back to the Grave, actually.
Oh, great.
So that'll be fun.
Awesome.
Looking forward to that.
Cheers, Daniel. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you so much.
So you've got to be interested in death. It's the last great taboo. It's the only taboo left.
Precisely. I mean, why is it, do you think, that everyone in here is dressed in black? It's a celebration of death.
No, I just like the clothes.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, the clothes look good. Yeah, I mean, death looks good. Charles Manson, yeah? No, he was cool.
Don't know if I mentioned it before, but I'm actually a vampire.
Sinister suggestions.
This month's Sinister suggestion is a bit of an odd one. I don't usually recommend products, but to be honest, I haven't really done too much this month. It's been kind of a crazy month. I haven't had too much time for film or books. I have had a little bit of time to post some videos to the Cemetery Confessions YouTube channel, which you should check out if you haven't yet. I did see Logan, which is a fantastic movie, and I did get the new Mass Effect game on sale, which is kind of a mixed bag. If you're a sci-fi fan like me and into kind of the more Star Trek exploration side of things, I would still recommend that. But it's rough. It's rough around the edges and can be downright disappointing at times. That said, for a gothy suggestion, I'm going with Goth Pikes. And the reason I'm recommending them is just because I purchased a pair for my wife's birthday. And they came and they're beautiful. And I have had a pair for the last year. And they've held up pretty well. It took a while to break them in. And so I had some cramping, some uncomfortable situations there. But once they were broken in, I wear them almost every day, and they hold up pretty well. They've got, they're well made, and they look really fucking cool. I have a YouTube review of them, but if you're looking for a quality pair of Goth Pikes, and if you can afford them, every goth should have one, then I recommend the Etsy page Goth Pikes. And I simply recommend them because it's run by some goths out of Germany, and they're passionate about the scene, and they interact with goths, and yeah, they're pretty cool people. So that's my suggestion. Next month, we will be back with a brand new show, and we're going to be hanging out with the dynamic duo over at We Have a Technical, which is the podcast of the website I Die You Die, which is where they cover industrial, gothy things, lots of music, some culture stuff, and some nerdy things as well. So I think that's going to be a really fun time. Like I said, check out the YouTube channel. If you enjoyed the show and you want to help support us, take a look at patreon.com/Cemetery Confessions. You can sign up for as little as $1 a month, and that $1 is greatly appreciated. You can get some behind-the-scenes videos and other such fun stuff. So that's it for this month. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to get in contact, you can email us, cemeteryconfessions@gmail.com. But until next time, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of The Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.